Hi, main star recapped here. I'll be explaining the American horror thriller movie named Nine Dead. Beware of spoilers, pay attention and subscribe now. The film begins in Los Angeles with an enigmatic individual meticulously assembling a weaponry arsenal, suggesting that he is preparing a sinister scheme. The action then shifts to a nightclub where Sully, the proprietor, is shown yelling at a dancer for taking a break. He abruptly becomes paralyzed and abducted by someone wearing a mask as he exits the nightclub to head home. We eventually run upon Jackson, a police officer, who is hanging out with a colleague. The same masked man kidnaps him as well, spraying his colleague's eyes with tear gas before running away. Another man, Coogan, is watching the news about a string of kidnappings in the city from a nearby cafe. Word spreads first, so as he leaves the cafe out of concern, he senses that someone is following him. Coogan tries to defend himself by drawing a knife, but the stranger swiftly paralyzes him with an electric jolt before dragging him away. Christian, a young man, is the next victim. He is spotted late at night leaving a bar. Then we meet Kelly Murphy, who after receiving an electric shock that paralyzes her, is also abducted by the stranger. The abducted victims are all shown in the same room with bags over their heads and chained to poles in the next scene. Shortly after, the man in the mask turns on the lights and starts taking the tape and sacks out of each person's mouth. It is discovered that the room contains 9 hostages in total. In addition to the victims we've already seen, there are new ones like Leon, Eddie, Father Francis, a priest, and Chan, a Chinese woman who doesn't understand English. The victims all start swearing at the man in the mask because they don't understand why they are here. But the abductor calmly tells them that every one of them has been brought here for a particular reason, and it is up to them to discover it. He threatens to kill one of them every 10 minutes if they don't find out the truth. However, he pledges to free the survivors and reveal all of his misdeeds to the police if they succeed. The man in the mask then tosses several pieces of chalk onto the floor, sets the timer, and leaves the room. The prisoners start to question what they could have done to merit such punishment when one of their hands is abruptly freed. Eddie gestures at Father Francis, implying that he may have assaulted a child, but the priest maintains that he has never harmed anyone. The others yell and curse at Coogan after he admits to having abused a child. Eddie then grabs a piece of chalk and starts writing on the wall as each person gives a brief introduction. As a district attorney, Kelly discloses that she has imprisoned numerous criminals, one of whom may be seeking retribution. Shortly after, Christian knows Sully and remembers conducting business with him a few years prior. Sully, who had lent Christian $5,000 for drugs, turns out to be a loan shark. Christian spent 3 years in prison after being apprehended while attempting to sell the drugs. However, because of the man's extremely intimidating reputation, he eventually repaid Sully's money after he got out. Christian, however, discloses that he has moved on from that life and is currently working as a bartender while pursuing a career in Hollywood. Before long, the timer goes off, and the man in the mask walks in and asks whether they have figured out why they are there. He ignores Kelly's pleas for more time and walks up to whisper something in Christian's ear. Before the masked man ruthlessly shoots him to death, the startled child claims he could never have figured it out. As the kidnapper carries the body out, shuts the door, and begins the timer again, everyone cries in fear. The prisoners then start arguing with one another and pressuring one another to confess their transgressions. Coogan abruptly discloses that he was recently freed from prison following a 5-year sentence. Due to the authorities' inability to locate the child's body, which shocked and appalled everyone, he received a reduced term. When Kelly inquires about Leon's past, he acknowledges that he and his brother used to loot. Everyone is shocked by this, but he defends himself by pointing out that he has never harmed children or killed anyone. Following this, Eddie talks about himself and says he works as an executive in health insurance. He says he is a decent person who has never committed any wrongdoing. He discloses that his brother-in-law received a colon cancer diagnosis a few years ago and that his business carries out experimental medical research. Eddie acknowledges that he falsified some paperwork to help his brother-in-law receive treatment, but he doesn't see why he should be punished for only attempting to support his family. When the gang discovers later that Kelly and Jackson are acquainted, they insist on learning more about their relationship. Kelly discloses that they had an affair, but Jackson's wife discovered it. divorced him, and moved to Arizona with the children. Jackson disputes the group's theory that it might be his ex-wife seeking retribution because he gives her a sizable monthly payment. Leon then has an idea and begs his neighbor, Sully, to kick his arm in order to free himself from the handcuffs. Sully, who likes to beat people up, instantly agrees and starts kicking him. Everything goes according to plan, and everyone is thrilled when Leon is able to liberate his hand. Jackson then instructs him to conceal behind the door and strike the murderer as soon as he gets inside. Leon, however, flips everybody off and goes outside by himself, refusing to assist anyone. But before he can go very far, he runs across the kidnapper, who has been recording everything. After a fierce struggle, Leon overcomes him and even takes his gun. The murderer calmly admits that he has been planning this for 2 years and that nothing will stop him while he is holding him at gunpoint. Leon's gun turns out to be unloaded, and when he tries to flee, the abductor shoots him, severely wounding him. Shortly after, the other prisoners are horrified as the man in the mask pulls the injured Leon back into the cell and cuffs him once more. He demands to know why they are there once more, but no one knows. Coogan requests that the murderer get the others out of the way of the blood spray as he approaches him brandishing a gun, since he does not want them to perish so quickly. Coogan acknowledges that the kidnapper's whisper in his ear is a valid explanation. Then he tries to choke the man in the mask, but the latter easily overcomes him and shoots him in the heart. He tells Leon that he will be the next victim as he carries Coogan's dead body out of the room. The group's anxiousness increases when the timer resumes a little while later because they still don't know why they are there. When Chan recognizes Kelly and starts talking in Mandarin, there's a brief ray of hope. But since no one else can understand her, Chan draws something with the chalk and even adds "bang bang," implying shooting. Kelly eventually recognizes her at this point, and she verifies that her name is Noon Chan. It turns out that Kelly had dealt with a robbery case involving Chan's liquor business a few years prior. The elderly grandmother recognized the criminal as Wade Greeley, a 20-year-old Kelly had imprisoned. But since all they have is the robbery and a name, they are still unable to make the connection. Leon chooses to confess with just 2 minutes left and acknowledges that he lied when he claimed he hadn't killed anyone. It turns out that after a business betrayal, he killed his own brother and sold all of their firearms. When a repentant Leon asks for forgiveness, the priest responds, "He who seeks forgiveness shall find it." Leon, who is bleeding from his wound, remembers the abductor saying that he had been preparing this for 2 years. The group tries to recall what they were doing at the time, and this offers them some optimism. Shortly after, the door opens and the murderer shoots Leon and pulls him away after realizing they still don't have an answer. Father Francis abruptly admits that he knows why they are here, but he is unable to convey anything amid the mayhem and uncertainty. It's because he heard it in confession, and he values his relationship with God more than his own life. Father Francis remains silent despite Sully's attempts to convince him and Kelly's threats to murder him. Eddie urges everyone to share their darkest secrets and speculates that they might have to solve the problem without the priest. Father Francis makes it apparent that the gang is headed in the wrong road as they start disclosing some terrible things they have done. He makes it clear that Wade Greeley had nothing to do with the heist. Kelly contends that since Chan was an eyewitness and they had reliable proof, it is untrue. But Eddie surmises that someone in the room confessed to the priest, and he believes it was Christian. In a startling turn of events, they discover that Christian was the one who robbed the business to settle his obligation to Sully after the priest confirms it. This infuriates Sully, who thinks it's absurd that he must perish simply for lending a child $5,000. When the killer shows up beyond the allotted 10 minutes, Sully starts yelling that he is being punished for such a trivial matter. He challenges the murderer to shoot him, but the man ignores him and looks at Eddie instead. However, Father Francis unexpectedly protects Eddie and is shot in his place as he pulls the trigger. Kelly tries to negotiate with the murderer as he carries the priest's body away, even addressing him by the name Wade. Before leaving the room, the man pauses and declares that he is not Wade. Jackson speculates that the man might be a friend or relative of Wade when the timer resumes. Kelly, meanwhile, argues that no one was there at his trial and that given how long ago it was, she doesn't remember anyone. Jackson considers it strange that Wade was incarcerated 5 years ago, given that the murderer has only been plotting this for 2 years. At this point, Sully comes to a revelation and remembers how Christian said he had nothing upon his release from prison. But without a firearm, he could not have pulled off the booze shop heist. He believes Leon was the one who sold the gun to Christian, since he remembers Leon stating he sold the weapons after killing his brother. They still don't understand how Coogan, Eddie, and Jackson are related to this, but that clarifies why the others are all in the cell. The killer enters the room just after the timer goes off once more. Chan finally comprehends the logic behind everything when he gives her a piece of paper with Mandarin writing on it. The horrified woman sobs and offers a heartfelt apology as she collapses to her knees. However, the man savagely shoots her to death, showing her no mercy. Kelly is terrified and begs the murderer to let her go, claiming she has a son who needs his mother. But the murderer inquires as to when she last spent time with her son, who is primarily looked after by a nanny. After telling her not to use her child as an excuse, he suddenly turns to face Jackson and says that this should also infuriate him. When the murderer departs, Jackson is perplexed and says, "What the hell does that mean?" It turns out that he is Kelly's son's father. She withholds this knowledge from him, which infuriates him. He even refers to her as a self-centered, immoral lady who is likely concealing something significant. Kelly is hesitant at first, saying that if this knowledge came out, she would be dead. But in the end, she decides to tell the truth. She acknowledges that Wade fit Chan's description at the time and was picked up close to the booze store. She needed a win after losing case after case, but she lacked strong proof. Nobody used to take her seriously because she was the lowest performing lawyer at the time. She chose to frame Wade in order to keep her job, and it turned out that Chan had taken some of Christian's hair during the altercation. After stealing some hair from Wade's comb, Kelly made the decision to utilize Jackson, her lover. Because of his access, she slipped inside the evidence room and replaced the hair sample. This indicates that Jackson unintentionally assisted her in fabricating evidence, which led to the poor child's incarceration. Everyone is appalled by her behavior after learning this, but Kelly claims it can never be revealed because she would go to jail, lose her job, and lose her child. The group starts speculating that Wade's father, who wants to exact revenge on his son, may be the murderer. They begin to speculate about Wade's post-prison life and believe that he must have met Coogan, who was also found guilty 5 years prior. However, they are still unable to understand Eddie's role in the entire narrative, despite the clocks going down quickly. Shortly after, the murderer walks into the room and brutally murders Sully when they are unable to give a comprehensive response. Only Kelly, Jackson, and Eddie are left after the man departs, and they are afraid and nervous. Eddie then remembers how just before Coogan passed away, he begged the murderer not to spill his blood on anyone because he was afraid it would kill them. Eddie then speculates that Coogan must have had AIDS and may have encountered Wade while incarcerated, where he attacked and infected the young man. Eddie clarifies that his company was doing pharmacological therapy experiments to extend the lives of AIDS patients around the time Wade was released from prison. The other two reject this hypothesis as absurd. Rejecting applicants was part of Eddie's work, and he used to do so in accordance with corporate policy if the applicant had a criminal past, was too young, had the wrong insurance, or didn't have enough money. Eddie acknowledges that it's possible that he turned down Wade's application due to his criminal history. Wade's father started planning retaliation 2 years ago because his son passed away at that time. Shortly after, the murderer re-enters the room and inquires as to whether they had learned the truth. The man takes off his mask after Eddie tells him all they've discovered. He says that his son was a very courageous boy and that everyone in the room might have saved his life. For the rest of their lives, the elderly guy advises them to keep in mind what they did and the repercussions of it. The elderly man then tells Kelly that the police are on their way and offers her the key to release herself and the others. However, Kelly abruptly strikes him and takes his revolver after uncuffing herself. She discloses that she cannot allow her life to be destroyed if the truth is out. After shooting the elderly guy, she fires at Eddie and Jackson right after, killing them. But it turns out that the old man's bulletproof vest has kept him alive. He informs Kelly that everyone has been watching the video and will now be able to identify Kelly Murphy's true identity. She shoots him in the head because she doesn't care. Kelly exits the cell in the last scene, right as the police show up at the building. She is able to elude them, but since the entire incident has already been made public, it is obvious that she will not be able to avoid the